have to confess that I didn't realize I was supposed to have opening remarks until Lydia told me 10 minutes ago. So I don't have any. I will say that we just, I just came from a rehearsal for A Streetcar, and things are going well. So we had our first run through of the whole tamale a couple nights ago. It went really, really well. And usually at this point in the process is when I think as a director and actors, you finally see it all together for the first time and you absolutely hate it. And you say, the recording in my head is always, is it really too late for law school at this point? But I didn't honestly feel that way this time with Streetcar, which has got me a little bit nervous because I thought it's in pretty good shape. So I look forward to chatting more.
That's great. How many people know Streetcar Named Desire? Yeah, okay. How many people have actually seen it in performance, not the movie? Seen it, right, yeah. So it's a completely different kind of conversation we're going to have now about than with the unfortunate. What do you got? What do you got for us?
What do I have? Oh, darn it. Let's see. Well, so Chris and I have been living in the world of Tennessee Williams now for a few years. And it's been delightful to go back into that world, with a director who has such passion for this playwright, for Tennessee's particular voice, and for the kinds of things that he's trying to create on stage through the use of words that are somehow poetic and yet pedestrian and familiar all at the same time. So how we turn that, those words into a story that walks that fine line between realism and nightmarish fantasy is always one of the challenges for us, and it's been wonderful to go back into that, and to of course sort of re-meet Tennessee Williams, but at an earlier point in his career. How many of you saw Cat on a Hot Tin Roof 2010? Yeah. All right, fantastic. Of course, when we were working on that play, we were so just consciously aware of what a crossroads that play was for Tennessee, and how much that play was challenging not only his own evolution as a writer, but also his own personal confidence in what he was trying to do. With Streetcar Named Desire, we are re-meeting Tennessee at an earlier point in his career. This is 1947, so 4 years before Cat?
Yeah. No, longer than that.
Longer than that, right. This was only, this was his second play after Glass Menagerie sort of exploded him onto the American theater scene. And I was telling Chris that I was just rereading the review from the New York Times by Brooks Atkinson, December 1947. And he has a little note in there about, how, after seeing Glass Menagerie, he thought this young writer might have talent, but we'll have to wait and see. But after seeing Streetcar Named Desire, he said, in the last 30 years, we have only had 3 writers, emerge with this kind of talent. And he mentions Odets, he mentions Saroyan, thank you, and Williams. So not bad for just like the second play in the sort of main stage New York theater. So it's great to sort of encounter this play. And for me, I've never actually seen this play on stage before. I've seen the movie. Certainly, how many of us, are not familiar with that famous line, I've always depended on the kindness of strangers. So I knew of this play before I even encountered it. Like, that's how deeply ingrained this play is in our American psyche today. So it's great to come into it both fresh and familiar all at the same time.
Yeah. I said to the actors in the room, because I had a lot of discussions with the actors before we started the rehearsal process, and I said to them, this play comes with a lot of ghosts, right? For me, there's the ghost of Elia Kazan, who directed the original production and directed the beautiful film. There's Brando, there's Vivian Lee, there's Kim Hunter, there's Carl Malden, there's Jessica Tandy, who did it originally. And I said to all of us, I think you were there, that, rather than try to wrestle with these ghosts and banish them from the room, let's invite them into the room. Because ultimately, those actors, that director, they were trying to tell the story of these people caught in this horrible web. And you know, I think the surprise for me has been it's an extraordinary play, and I know I've always had such an appreciation for it, but the true depths of the tragedy and what you are left with by the end of this story as it unfolds is a world that has changed, that has shifted, and nobody is a hero in this play. Nobody is an outright villain. People do very villainous things to each other in this play, but you are left with a horrible act of violence that completely changes everybody, affects everybody. And, you know, of course, I think in a pretentious way, right? He wrote it in 1947, less than 2 years after the atomic bomb, until the atomic age dawned. So you have a world very much wrestling with the capacity for horrible violence and how that changes you living with that knowledge. And I think I would also say a very surprising thing is how fun it's been. You know, I did say to the cast, we're going to go to some dark places with this play, and you're going to go to some dark places, but it's a play, and play should be fun, so I want us to have fun in the room. And it has been a very jokey, wonderful room, and I think that has enabled the actors to go pretty deep with this stuff. I mean, it is already, I think, the acting is incredible. You know, his truth, Tennessee would have been 102 yesterday, I think.
Oh, wow.
You know, he was a man of so many truths and many conflicting truths. But I think what he was getting at in this play, I don't know. You know, I'm never very good at these kinds of things. People say, like, well, what's the theme? It's like, I don't know, you know. Honestly, I always start with actors, so I don't ever start with conceptual ideas. I see actors inhabiting these bodies in these stories, but I think the truth, as we've gone along, is, you know, the capacity that we have to damage one another, right. And how that's something that comes too easily to us as people, and how we have to take care not to do that, and how little kindness costs, but how hard it can be sometimes to inhabit.
Well, you know, Tennessee was, you know, always seemed to be very aware of how his plays were constructed, you know, and he talks about it in his stage directions. Like, you know, Streetcar Named Desire is a 3-act play. And Act 1 introduces us to, you know, to Blanche, to Stella, to all the denizens of this, you know, particular, you know, house in the French Quarter. And he's very deliberate about the way that he weaves in not only this tiny little 2-room apartment, you know, in which it's claustrophobically intimate. But there is also, you know, there's always the awareness of the world outside of that. And Tennessee is very particular about the way in which, you know, he calls for a particular sound to be heard at just the right moment when Blanche is, you know, is at a point of realizing something or not realizing something. And so, you know, all of those references are very deliberate. And then we get to, you know, to the end of Act 1, you know, where, you know, Blanche and Stella and Stanley are, you know, caught in this very complicated dance of, you know, how this relationship is going to work with the 3 of them. And Tennessee tells us in the stage directions, you know, this is a hinge point. You know, this is the point at which, you know, something is going to change for Blanche. And then when we get into Act 2, all of a sudden, you know, yes, like, you know, things start developing along the tracks in which, you know, he set us up, but then the tone of the play starts changing. There's something very interesting about the way that this play plays with our sense of genre. You know, when we start out, we're in a comedy. And, you know, and I think as Chris was saying, like, you know, there's actually a lot of, you know, there's been a lot of laughter, you know, both in the rehearsal room, you know, as colleagues working on this play, but also because there is humor in the play that I think we don't anticipate. I think much like Hamlet, we find ourselves laughing at Hamlet and we don't know why. It's the same in Streetcar. And so as the comedy shifts and, through this really interesting, sort of valley of elegy before we really start that downward descent of tragedy, this really almost unbearable tragedy of the third act, it's all very deliberately constructed. And Tennessee, drops in, like those moments of sheer, just the flights of poetry that all of a sudden a character will launch into, either consciously or unconsciously. Because sometimes, these characters betray their truth, oftentimes without realizing it, by what they choose to say in a given moment or what they choose not to say. So like those moments are very, very finely constructed. He knew his craft. Tennessee knew his craft incredibly well.
But, for me, well, like with Cat, I want it to clearly feel of its period, but I think sometimes with Tennessee Williams and with all of those mid-century gentlemen, and they were mostly gentlemen, with the exception of Ms. Hellman, Miller and Odets and Inge, those guys, I think the danger with those guys is we appreciate them only historically. And my personal mission with Williams, as I've said before, is to take the Spanish moss off, right? Get rid of the molasses, get rid of it, and just to get down to these are brutally honest stories of people in conflict. And so I am not interested, I think, in trapping Tennessee Williams up with a lot of that stuff, With Cat, we very deliberately wanted to suggest the time period, but not to make it too literal, so that it sort of lets your mind, I think, expand a little bit more. We're trying to do the same thing with Streetcar. Visually, it's suggestive. It's not prescriptive. Christopher and I, Chris Acebo, who did this set, we deliberately wanted, sort of unconsciously, and I don't mean this at all in a sexist, reductive way, so bear with me. There was something about the Cat set that we wanted to feel feminine in a way. So it was a set that was, there were really very few sharp angles. It had that huge sort of circular track. We wanted Streetcar to feel very masculine and angular and sort of imposing. So it's a set that has no walls except for one that's huge. And at first thought, you think, well, it's set in a two-room apartment, it's supposed to be claustrophobic, but I thought, the language takes care of that so much. I want Blanche to feel like a gazelle out that got separated from the herd, and she is just exposed. There's no place that she can hide. So it's a black set. It's monochromatic. The floor, the ceiling. There's some wonderful, I hope, beautifully theatrical things that happen over the course of it. It definitely gets a little meta-theatrical at points, especially as the play goes on, which is something Tennessee asks for in terms of what happens, what you hear, you kind of descend into Blanche's mind by the end of the play, and so we're trying to reflect that a little scenically. But our goal with it was to keep it really open so that you could see the street life of the quarter, in ways that are both good and bad, threatening ways, encroaching on or putting pressure on the people in this apartment. And there's just a huge wall that tilts out towards the audience that we hope makes people feel like, that's what we want you to feel. So yes, when you come see it, go,